All right, I want to welcome you all to our River Management Roundtable on water trail maps. Our presenters have some awesome examples to share with you, and we'll also explore some of the qualities that can take your map to the next level if you're in the process of developing or updating your map. My name is Becca Price, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for the River Management Society. And if you are not a member of RMS or you're not familiar with what we do, we are a national nonprofit organization that supports professionals who study, protect, and manage rivers. We host a variety of workshops and collaboration opportunities throughout the year, as well as connecting members through river trips, our listserv, and our directory. So we host roundtables twice monthly. On the second Tuesday of the month, we cover on the water topics. These pertain to more technical aspects of river management. And then on the fourth Tuesday, we cover workplace culture topics. And these support diversity, equity, and inclusion work on your river. If there are topics you'd like to suggest or if you're interested in presenting, please let us know. We're planning out the next year and are all ears. Next slide. Okay. A couple of ground rules before we get started. Please be respectful of others and please actively participate. We do ask that you mute yourself if you're not speaking. And like I said, we'd love for you to have your camera on during discussions. Because we have had such a great turnout, we're going to try to save the latter portion of our time for discussion rather than pausing throughout as we sometimes do. In the meantime, you're welcome to submit questions and comments in the chat. Next slide. All right, I'd like to introduce our team at RMS and our awesome presenters. I'm not sure if Angie has joined us yet. She had a workshop right before this. But Risa, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh, Risa Shimoda is our executive director. Angie Furman is our River Training Center coordinator. I'm Becca. And then James and Jack, if y'all would like to introduce yourselves and take it away.
Thanks, Becca. My name is James Major. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm the National Rivers Project Coordinator, and I'm the curator of the National River Recreation Database for RMS. The National River Recreation Database is a geodatabase of water trails, wild scenic rivers, whitewater segments, and respective access points and campgrounds in the United States. It was conceived to provide a way to offer a high-level view of rivers across the nation using attributes important to and familiar to fans of rivers and outdoor recreation, and also to direct visitors to a definitive, detailed resource for experiences that can help them plan a visit. The National Rivers Project website, which is the website and map search engine designed for you when you're looking for places to visit and enjoy rivers, streams, and many lake or coastal destinations in the U.S. Search by location, difficulty, and related activities to see information on trip length, trip type, land manager, descriptive text, and photos. And the goal of the National Rivers Project is to increase the visibility and use for water trails, wild scenic rivers, and whitewater sections.
Awesome. Thanks, James. My name is Jack Henderson. I was formerly in the role that James is in with RMS, but now live here in Asheville, North Carolina on the French Broad River. I actually work for an organization called RiverLink. I run their land protection and access program, and also work as a consultant on the side for Pisca Map Company, and just love all things intersections between mapping and rivers, outdoor recreation, and conservation. So we are super excited to bring this discussion to y'all today. And as everyone's mentioned so far, put some questions in the chat throughout the discussion, and we will approach them as we're able to, either now or in a future roundtable. So with that, we'll jump in. James, go ahead.
All right, so I think we have too many people, obviously, to do round robin introductions. So we invite participants to enter in the chat where you are in the process of developing a river map, if you are. And while you're entering your responses, Jack will introduce an example of a river map that he has worked on. So if you want to go ahead and enter into the chat sort of details about where you are, if you're just starting out, we have a map, it's just okay. And that way we can get an idea of like where everybody is and maybe what we want to get out of any future discussions too.
Yeah, and as James mentioned, just to prime the pump while y'all are populating your own thoughts and examples for this, like I said, I'm here in Asheville, North Carolina. The French Broad River Paddle Trail flows through the area, which is about a 190-mile section of river between North Carolina and Tennessee, with lots of access points along it and campgrounds too. And I worked in the past with an organization called Mountain True to help produce a paddle trail booklet, or booklet map rather, for that. And that particular current map is in a booklet format. Each page represents a more detailed section of the river with an overview map, and that is produced and is consistently updated and is rolling along just fine. But most recently, Transylvania County, which is one of 4 counties within the state that the river passes through here in North Carolina, has been interested in producing a blueways map for the river's presence in its own county. So more detailed, at a kind of more trail guide style approach, with more detail about the access areas and things like that. So I'm really excited to hear from other folks today and kind of share some examples together to get ideas for that. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump forward into a brief overview of components, of a map, and kind of ways to take it up a notch from there. What's going to happen is James and I are going to go through brief examples of these 14 essential components. Obviously, there are tons of other components of maps, whether they're print or interactive, out there. These are just a few that we thought would be most relevant to paddle trails and web maps and things within the river context. But obviously there's more than this out there as well. So with that said, all of these components are applicable to static maps. So static maps being printed, published, whether online or printed, but non-interactive, and interactive being, web-based or mobile-based or, scalable and things like that. So we'll give examples that touch on both of these. Yeah, we're going to run through them. I'll take the first 7, and James will take the following 7 after that. We'll go through them pretty quickly, but feel free, if you see one you like or you're curious about, drop a note in the chat. We've got the backing information for all of these in terms of where they came from, and can reference them following up if need be. So with that, we'll jump in. So scale, scale is the first thing I think about when I design or use any map. It's a function of how much detail is visible and how much area the map covers, and the functions between those two. So this example here is from the Payette River Guide produced by the Bureau of Land Management. This is all the areas around Banks, Idaho, Cascade, Lowman, that region. So on the far left, there are inset maps for the booklet pages. Each of those pages represent, or each of those boxes represent a detailed map within the booklet. In the middle, there is the regional map for sections of river difficulty and general location. And then on the far right is additional detail, covering rapids, access points, campgrounds, etc. So an example of varying scale all within one region. Mileage, on rivers especially, mileage is really important in terms of how far of a section on the river you are going to be paddling, and also how far between points of interest, what the location is between points of interest. So the example here on the left, both of these maps are from the same river, the Tuckasegee River, in Jackson and Swain counties in western North Carolina. These maps are produced by American Rivers and the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga on the left, and then the one on the right is Energy. And on the left, the mileage is indicated just in terms of mile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and onward, going from upstream to downstream. And you can see where other bits of information are located along that. And on the right, a little bit different, they denoted, the river mileage for certain access areas, parks, points of interest, businesses, etc., and didn't otherwise designate mileage in terms of, sequential ordering. So 2 different ways to approach mileage for the same place, both helpful for different reasons. Rapid classification. Obviously within rivers, rapids are really relevant. Even on more flat water runs, it might be important to call out any sort of wet water, rapid or issue. So lots of examples here. Top left is just a Grand Canyon overview map from a rafting outfitter, just kind of showing the general existence of rapids. and the general, location of them amongst themselves. This is in northern Arizona, obviously on the Colorado River. The middle, that's the French Broad River Paddle Trail here in Asheville. Booklet style, the rapids are denoted in red, to call attention to them in terms of their prominence or importance within the context of other infrastructure. Bottom left, that's the New River National Park and Preserve, produced by the National Park Service in Fayetteville, West Virginia. And it has additional detail on rapid classification, size, length, even footprint of the rapid itself, along with other information, cultural points of interest, tributaries, etc., which can definitely help with context. And then on the far right, a little bit different. This is, one of William Neely's hand illustrated maps for the Nolichucky River, and he has maps and illustrations for rivers all across the southeast and southern Appalachian mountains. This one is illustrated in kind of in a third dimensional style of way, where there are images of how the rapids actually look and long descriptions of how to navigate them, what the dangers are, issues, etc. His maps kind of have a sense of, comedicism. They're kind of comedic and funny to some way, but they're also super informative, and a lot of people use them to learn about a place that they're going. Managing agency, so all of our locations and rivers, pass through a variety of types of public lands, parks, etc. Far left, this example is from the Bruno, Jarbidge, and Owyhee River Guide, produced by the Bureau of Land Management in Idaho. This is an overview map that depicts and identifies a diverse mix of land management and private property, including the Owyhee River Wilderness, South Fork Owyhee River Wilderness Study Area, different Indian reservations, and private land. In the middle, a little bit differently, this is the Maumee River Water Trail, produced by Metro Parks Toledo in Northwest Idaho. And this one here calls out parks and points of interest in different land management places on a point level. And those call out labels depict different parks and public lands along the route. And then on the far right side of the screen is the forks of the Flathead Wild and Scenic River System, North Fork, South Fork, and Middle Fork, showing the presence of the Lewis and Clark National Forest, Glacier National Park, and Bob Marshall Wilderness Area within northeastern Montana. Access points, probably almost the most important component of any river or paddle trail map is where can I get off and on the river, and where can I enjoy it along the way. So on the left is the Greater Missoula, Montana Clarks Fork River map, put together by the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Department in cooperation with the Tourism Bureau and Downtown Partnership in Missoula, Montana. On here, you'll see there are numbered points labeled for access points and parks, but importantly, there is a table providing additional details with name, parking, hours, access point type, restrooms, and garbage facilities. So this is really important because it allows for the map creator and the reader to not necessarily understand all that information at each point, but they can reference a table where information can be categorized more efficiently. And on the right, shameless plug for the National Rivers Project, is a screenshot from the NRRD on nationalriversproject.com showing different access points and water trail opportunities around San Francisco, to where, again, it would be really hard to display labels and information as live labels around each point. But when you click on these points, it displays the name of the access point, the manager, the access point type, whether it's a boat ramp, etc., parking, restrooms, etc. So another way to kind of scale the approach to displaying access point information. Camping, next to access points, overnight trips definitely rely on campsites. On the far left, that's the upper and lower Salmon River Guides, again, produced by the BLM in Idaho. There's point symbology, as you can see, for campgrounds and campsites. They denote whether it's a pay site, so there's a fee, or if there's not. And then also within the context of other points of interest, such as picnic areas, access to water, restrooms, and mile markers, and road access too, in terms of the peripheral highway. So really helpful information when you're looking at campsites along the way. On the right, this is the web-based interactive map version of the French Broad River Paddle Trail here outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And kind of like the NRRD, we have it set up to where you can click on points and learn more detail about each campsite, along with access points outfitters, breweries, other facilities along the way. And then lastly, fishing. As paddlers, we think a lot about river recreation. And a lot of times those river recreation enthusiasts are paddlers, anglers, fly fishers, etc. So having maps that are respective to that topic is really helpful and important. A little bit blurry, but on the left is the Hiwassee River in eastern Tennessee. This map specifically includes hatch charts and recommended flies in terms of fly fishing opportunities for that, but it also has information on access points, put-ins, takeouts, parking locations, and local information. On the right, quite similarly, this is the Truckee River, produced by Wilderness Adventure Press in Lake Tahoe, California, and Reno, Nevada. And again, there's river mileage shown for floating distances. There's also a hatch chart and recommended flies, and then GPS coordinates for every access points, boat ramp, bridges, campgrounds, etc. So all the normal components of a river or water trail map, but specific information about, fishing information in terms of hatch charts, flies, etc. And with that, I'll pass it on to James.
All right, thanks, Jack. I will continue on, and I'll start with rec permit requirements. And there are several that I hope to win this week and this weekend. So good luck to me and all of you. I'm sure there's more than a few of us that have also put in for permits this year. But as why we have permits is stated by the BLM. Special recreation permits allow land storage to coordinate and track commercial and competitive use of public lands. They also provide resource protection measures to ensure the future enjoyment of those resources by the public. The river maps and areas where a special permit is required for all or part of a float season can include information about where and when permits can be obtained. For interactive maps, a link to the permit information is useful in what we use in the National Rivers Project, and allows for continued accuracy of information even when permitting changes are made by the managing agency. For example, the John Day Wild Scenic River in Oregon is changing how they permit this year, and because our site links to their site, our site's not out of date because it just tells them that they will have to do a rolling schedule instead of block releases this year. But even on river maps that are depicting areas that don't need permits, it might still be useful to mention that a special permit is not needed. Something useful. So next slide, Jack, please. Wild and scenic rivers make up less than 1/2 of our nation's rivers. River maps can help identify the locations of these special river segments with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition. The National River Project identifies wild and scenic rivers with special symbology, just as we do for water trails and whitewater segments. On the right there, going from south to north, we've got the New River and its style of designation is wild and scenic in North Carolina, and a river trail through Virginia and parts of West Virginia, and then continuing on as wild and scenic and whitewater is one of the tribs there, and then as whitewater north of that. So different symbology to show different things. In addition to identifying where the wild and scenic rivers are located, the website also links to the rivers.gov page for individual rivers, so shoppers can identify the type of boating experience they might expect based on a designated river segment classification. And a good example of this is the Road River seen on the left, when the original eight wild and scenic rivers includes segments of all 3 classification types. You can go to the next slide, Jack. And as a national mapping project, the NRP does not include landmarks per se. But for many local river maps, these are the critical components that add value to your maps, and in some cases are the focus or purpose of the river map. An example of this is the African American Heritage River Trail story map created by Openlands that honors the 180 years of African American history along the Little Calumet River. Other river maps include local businesses and natural landmarks where paddlers can refuel their bodies as well as their minds and find side adventures and points of interest along their trip. These landmarks also help recreationalists find places to spend money and contribute even value for the map maker by securing partnerships or sponsorships with local businesses, which flows quite well into the next slide, Jack, which is funding. We all need it. River maps are not free to create or maintain, no matter what medium they exist in. For print maps, a blurb somewhere on the map document telling the reader where they can donate or find other products for purchase from your organization may be the way to go. For digital media, it makes good sense to add buttons, such as the one included here on the North Forest Canoe Trail trip planner, where users can go to the donate page or to buy waterproof maps that take on the river. So a way to bring in income for your group right there on the map. You can go to the next slide. For digital maps, the ability to do some really cool things are now possible. One of my favorite examples is the Ohio River Recreation Trail, which includes real-time commercial boat traffic along with commercial marine highway on the main stem Ohio River. This map even shows whether the boat is moving or stopped, if it's moving in which direction, how fast, it'll have the name of the barge if you click on it, all that information. Other layers in this interactive map show things such as current wind speed and direction, which also useful, as many of us know. You can go to the next slide, Jack. Scalability. Print maps often have extent maps that show overviews of the river in its entirety, along with zoomed in maps with far greater detail. Interactive maps also have this capability and should be created in a way that allows for maximum readability at any given scale. This particular interactive map is a good example. You can get a good sense of where access points and potential hazards are located from the zoomed out regional scale when zoomed in closer. They tell you the same thing and are clickable at both scales, but the icons add to the visual style when zoomed in that would not be practical in the zoomed out map. It would just be too congested. Next slide. Dam release schedules. Print maps might include a dam release chart as long as the releases are static and planned long in advance. The downloaded PDF on the right of the Appalachia recreational release schedule is a good example of that. That's for 2020. But interactive maps have the ability to link to the live site that can reflect changes in schedules over time and not require an active update by the river map administrator. We do this with NRP by linking to the river flow information website maintained by the dam operator. That being said, a disclaimer might be a good option as well, such as the one provided here by the Hiawassee River Blueway, and they're linked to the TVA water release schedule that warns that releases can change without notice. Next slide. So those are some of the map components that Jack and I discussed, and I'm sure there's many others available, like Jack said, and I encourage you to drop others into the chat and bring them up during the discussion that we have a little bit later during the roundtable. For now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and touch on data collection and storage. I will focus how we do this for the National River Recreation Database, but I'm sure there's other ways that you might accomplish some of these tasks, and welcome comments and discussion in the chat and also later. So a quick note about attributes and schema. An important early step is to determine what you want to include in your data and craft your schema around that carefully. There are attributes that we could have included from the beginning of our project, but are now very difficult to go back and add years later, as we now have thousands of points of data. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. So it's really important to really round up and figure out what you want to use. So for data, the National Hydrography Data Set from the USGS. I use it for all river mapping applications. Even if my map is for a small area or for just a few river segments, I use it every time. I never know when I might want to connect the underlying GIS information to other segments for analysis or to expand the map itself. Having a standard river network such as NHD helps in this immensely. I stress this across all river mapping that I do. Of course, it is big data and it has flaws, and sometimes you have to fix it at a local scale. For example, Wild Scenic Fossil Creek had to be reconnected because the hydrology changed after they took the dam out. But again, big data. But you're much more likely to be able to collaborate with other groups or even just keep your own project interoperable using standardized river lines. And so I highly recommend the NHD for that. Another data set that's really useful is the Protected Area Database, or the PADIS. And it's useful to keep around while developing your maps, both for print or for digital usage. Can really help with determining managing agencies for things such as access points, as well as help you show where private property is located, so the information you're putting out there is less likely to get someone in trouble for trespassing, for example. Other data sources to consider are OpenStreetMap, where people can use US Forest Service enterprise data, and along with state and local sources. As for storage, that likely depends on the size of the database you have and the type of river maps you're creating. We have offsite server storage for the National River Recreation Database, which has pros and cons. Some of the pros include the ability to store large amounts of data that are continually growing as we add river segments, access points, campgrounds, and has the ability to be able to work on a feature before it appears live as the site refreshes like once a day. So it takes that data from ARC Pro and makes it live on the hosted site, which that can also be a con if you are informed that you have an error that needs fixing or an update that needs to be made. As again, it only wants to update once a day, so you have to navigate that. We'll go to the next slide, and I will turn it back over to Jack for a bit.
Cool. Thanks, James. That's all super helpful and informative. One last thing that I was thinking about here about data, I recognize that, a lot of us that put together maps utilize backing, geospatial data for that. But I also recognize that a lot of folks, might create maps that are not, based in GIS data, to where they're just illustrated in design software and things like that. And, I would love to hear from folks about their experiences with that versus maps rooted in geospatial data, because the latter is where most of my experience is in, and hence the discussion around data itself. So with that, another question, for the chat, what is given all that we've talked about so far, we would love to hear and learn, what is unique to your river map, maybe the components themselves that are added in it, for example, the mobile live tracked barge traffic is really interesting and unique, and most places might not have that, but it's obviously really important in this location, or potentially things like dams or rapids might be unique. But we'd love to hear what other components are unique to your location. Also data sources, the data that people use and track might be very unique or interesting to that particular place. And we'll love to hear that. Same with schema, attributes and schema, how you track your information. Like James was alluding to, sometimes you might track data and information for use in the map, but you might end up using that information in another context, in terms of gathering statistics or calculating mileage or other things that are relevant to discuss or communicate, but not necessarily in the map itself. So we'd love to hear about, ways that y'all have used your data that are maybe different from the actual map itself, etc. And with that, I guess let's see here, because I've got the rest here. I was looking at my notes, and to it that, what data do you wish you had collected? Knowing what you know now, either from this presentation or from other experiences, what data do you wish you had collected? Like, are there certain types of points of interest, or a level of detail in your roads or streams or land ownership, etc., or even just local knowledge and feedback? Like, are there certain types of data or information that you wish you had collected earlier on that would be more relevant now, or maybe it's not too late to start collecting that information and have it be a resource and an asset, to your product going forward. So we'd love to hear from folks about that. And I'll go ahead on to the next slide. And so with that, I'll go through the print types of map and then pass it on to the interactive types of maps for James. So obviously there is an infinite type per se, of map itself, but there are a few kind of common categories that we thought of here that are relevant to discuss. And we have some examples on the right, all of which for the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, just because they had a few nice examples on their website for these. But there are so many other awesome organizations that produce similar types of maps across the spectrum. But overall, you're either going to be in an urban context or a rural context or somewhere in between. But that context will definitely dictate to some degree the types of detail you show, information displayed, scale, etc. Whitewater versus flat water. The terrain itself that your river is passing through is also going to dictate information information. On a whitewater river, having deep detail about rapids and hazards is going to be in type of craft is going to be super important. Whereas on a flatwater river, information on barges, or locks and dams and levees, or access in a place that's private property might be more important. So those considerations will be important to consider as you design or envision a map. Material. In the print context, this is often overlooked on the early side of planning of a map project, but what material is your end game in terms of this map? Like, do you want it to be waterproof? Do you want it to not be waterproof? Do you want it to be, a thick plasticky, booklet that's going to survive a long-term rafting trip, or can it be just a printed 8.5 by 11 piece of, printer paper for mass distribution? And then size and shape, do you want it to be a folded National Geographic style trail guide, a booklet, which is definitely popular given the linearness, of rivers and water trails? How big, how small? Do you want it to be big enough for a kiosk, but maybe most of your printings are smaller? So kind of thinking about that, size and scale consideration is really important. And for me, it's one of the first things I look at doing when talking with a partner to produce something. Go ahead, James.
All right. So I think we're all becoming more and more aware of the many types and styles of interactive maps available out there. And likely in the future, many organizations will have the river maps available in several formats simultaneously. A current example is the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, which already has its maps available in the form of print maps, interactive website, along with a mobile application. Whether to include offline options may often be location dependent. So think back to the capabilities of the Ohio River Recreation Trail Map. Being able to determine wind speed and direction along with boat traffic is awesome, but it's not designed for use where service is unavailable. So a river map designer for a remote river may have very different considerations than a map designer in more densely populated environments, and need to provide users with capabilities they can actually use. Even in places where you might have some service. My last trip comes to mind on the Colorado. We had some service, but it drained the phone so fast that power considerations too might, you don't want to have an app that takes a lot of power, so you might want to just have something that's like a downloadable, something that you can look at in airplane mode. And I think with that, we should move on to the next slide, Jack.
Yeah. So types of maps, lots of different types available. So last thing here we want to get into before kind of opening up the floor for more discussion is, how often and for what reasons are maps updated? We think about changing conditions and we think about, the reasons for which, but there are a lot of different reasons that a map can be updated. You might update a map when new amenities have arrived or amenities have closed or changed. I think about restrooms in terms of adding or removing a restroom, or maybe there is running water available now, and that's important to denote, or parking has changed, things like that. Amenities that are along the riverside that are helpful to know about as they come to be or go away. Environmental conditions such as floods, wildfires, stream restoration, dam removals, etc., all have an effect on the river and the river experience, and it might be helpful for your users of the map itself to know about those following the changes themselves. Increased usage. If your river or paddle trail is so successful to where you're having lots more people get on the river, maybe it's the years following COVID where outdoor recreation has become much more popular, but maybe your users are not quite as experienced or informed, you might think about information to add or to update that could be helpful to those new and different users. And along with that, community input. I always think it's helpful, to talk with people that are using the maps that I help produce or I'm using myself, to get a sense for what's helpful with them, what's confusing, what can be improved upon. Getting input from folks that are not producing the map is invaluable because that might represent, the greater population versus just the folks that are on the inside with the project. And then frequency of sales and printing. Here with my work with Pisgah Map Company and our trail guides, we try to, update our maps annually, and we try to print enough maps and sell enough maps to where we sell out within a year, and that allows for us to update and reproduce and reprint within that yearly timeline. So your frequency of sales might drive your printing and thus your update system. And all of these, are definitely are different considerations for print versus interactive. Print maps, you actually have to physically print and produce it, so it might be less frequent in terms of your updates. Interactive maps, you can update on the fly. You can update them much more frequently and have that information available to your users basically whenever you want to, if your map is web-based or mobile-based. But yeah, would love to hear from y'all about, how often and for what reasons your maps are updated. And with that, James, you want to ask about final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So it looks like we have a lot of different people that have different experiences and different levels of their map where they are in it, which is really cool. So I've seen some questions in the chat, and maybe we can get to some of those, and possibly like other people can answer people as well that have the experiences with their local maps. So we invite discussion. And shameless plug one more time, when you do complete your water trail maps, river maps, we invite you to share them with us at the National Rivers Project so that we can add them to the National River Recreation Database so we can cross-link with each other. And so our folks can find you and your folks can find us.
And also, too, before we jump into questions here, and I'll minimize my screen so I can see everybody, Becca, do you want to give a shameless plug for the webpage you put together recently?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So Jack actually sent out a request to our listserv asking for examples of maps, which kind of like planted the seed for this roundtable. So I think we have around 30 different examples now that people have sent in. They're on a page on our website, river-management.org. Under the river planning tab, you'll find that. But check those out. There's a lot of different kinds, digital and print maps. And we would love for you to share yours as well. And hopefully those are helpful to you.
Awesome. Well, should we jump through some of the questions? I've not been able to see this, but I can minimize my screen so that I can.
Here's a thread to a couple of questions. This is Risa for James and Jack. A couple of people are asking about how best to show obstructions or strainers, or someone even talks about regular flooding. So that's something that wouldn't be in a printed map. But what would you suggest for that? Something that's time and safety oriented? How you might have seen that addressed in a map or an online resource of some sort?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it in correlation to rapids, but obviously strainers and dangers definitely, change based off of stewardship of such or additional floods and impacts. Here on the French Broad, we don't necessarily specifically denote the presence or absence of strainers, but I think we do actually on the booklet maps have a note on that page in a location where they're common, kind of further upstream where the river is more narrow, there's more riparian development in terms of agriculture, and a lot of trees in the water as a result. I think we have a note on there just denoting that, hey, this area, is commonly inundated with strainers, use caution. It might appear to be a beginner stretch based off of its, lack of gradient and, kind of easy access, but it might not be the most beginner friendly section because of strainers and trees and things like that. So maybe, less, in my opinion, less of denoting the presence of them, but more so just talking about its existence and considerations around that.
Similar here too, Jack, with the National Rivers Project. We wouldn't keep that. That's information that changes too fast for us to be able to include. But we do link to pages. Example would be the BLM site. So you can click on the BLM link on our river description, and it'll take you. And a lot of times they'll be like, there's often large woody debris or logs in this stretch of the river. So be careful, scout, all those things, but not directly maintained by us.
Agreed.
Here's one response. Cassie said that there's on the river's condition map is interactive. Paddlers can log obstructions. An administrator can add a date and approve or change it. So you need an administrator there.
Yeah, that's a great idea in terms of noting presence or absence of strainers on like an interactive setting. This is a whole different world, but I think about, mountain bikers and trail conditions, not necessarily even on a map, but on just a web page denoting that, hey, the trail's muddy, it's soggy, today's not a good day. Doing that for water quality or for strainers could be a helpful technique for river context.
I'm just gonna oh, go ahead.
Just to clarify, the administrator is simply me. We run it through WordPress on our website. So as long as you have your own website, you could add that as a page, and it's very simple to update the map.
Sweet. That's awesome.
Cool.
Check that out. Cool.
Hey, Jack. If you want to stop sharing your screen, then I think it will open up the screen for us to see more. Yeah, there we go.
Sure.
It's like Inception of everyone, kind of.
Everyone's on there. Cool. So yeah, I see another question in the chat that I think we kind of talked on a little bit, but not a whole lot. It's a question about, growing up with paper maps, but, now I'm all into GIS. Should our new river map be only digital? New as in, not old, not the new river itself. And that's a great question. A lot of people ask a lot about, hey, are paper maps dead? Is there relevancy for print maps anymore? And as someone that loves paper maps, I will always say, no, they are not dead. I see friends use them all the time. Paper maps do not run out of battery. They do not die when they fall into the water, and they do not, have issues in terms of needing cell phone service. However, I think in my experience, there's use opportunity for everything. I think, a lot of people really like using print maps on their phone. They like having, in my experience with paddling and biking, people like to be able to see, where they are, on a map, and thus having, a static version of it could be helpful, even if not a digital type of map. But I think a lot of folks like to, plan trips on their computer ahead of time, and thus having that mobile example or that digital example on a website can be super helpful. So I guess to answer that question, like in my opinion and experience, I think definitely paper maps are not dead, but there's room to have a variety of types of resources if your capacity allows for that. And as we can see with the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, they maintain all three of those. And I was on the Allagash River this past fall, which is a component of that paddle trail, and we used paper maps the whole time, and it was super helpful to roll a map out on the table and write on it and put pins in it and kind of talk about where we are. But before the trip, it was really helpful to use the computer and look through the map online and kind of get a sense for where things are all across the watershed. So lots of applications for all of those resources.
Let's see, there's also a question about river mileage. I think, Risa, you answered that in the chat.
Yeah, Andrea asked for a best practice of river mileage, and the main standard that I was aware of was the NHG, which is not helpful for us. It goes backwards, it goes upstream from a confluence, but there might be another protocol that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, and I see Heather's question here. Heather Barrar had a question, that their map is for paddling as well as land trails. Difficult to communicate mileage to these two different user groups. Maybe that's the one that you're referencing with mileage. Yeah, I mean, in my Transylvania County example, that question is really relevant. In Transylvania County, Western North Carolina, there's a lot of mountain biking in the national forest. At some points, it is pretty close by to the river, but for the most part, it's pretty separate. And that county and other map makers have produced a variety of maps, for the trails in that area separately. And then, the river map is going to be a separate resource. So my experience, is kind of, the maps will utilize or might prioritize showing different types of information, and thus might be helpful to have two different ones. That said, though, if the trailheads for your terrestrial trails are in close proximity to the river, and greenways and such connect, there's no reason not to show those. But thinking about your primary user might be helpful. And, from like a tourism and outreach perspective, might be helpful just to have a general overview map that kind of shows where the paddle trail is, where the mountain bike and hiking trails are. But in terms of dense detail, it could be more helpful to develop separate resources. But really just depends, but that's been my experience with that.
And then Jack, I would like to add on to that as well for a digital example of that. Again, I'm going to call back to the Ohio River Recreation Trail. They also do bike trails as well. So when you first log into their map, you reach a fork in the road on the internet, and you select whether you're boating or whether you're biking. So that's another way that they have dealt with that sort of issue digitally by creating, two separate online maps, one that's focused on bikers and one that's focused on boaters.
Nice. That's awesome. Looking through the rest of the questions here.
Quick question, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thank you all for your time. This is really great. My name's Ben. I'm a student at Clemson University. I was just curious, have you seen maps which incorporate routes, for example, where you have multiple access points on a water trail and they recommend, okay, access point A to C is this, and then at the same time incorporate shuttle logistics and tips for that?
That's a great question, for sure. I can reference again the French Broad River Paddle Trail here in North Carolina, not too far at all from Clemson for that matter. In that booklet, we do have suggested trips and kind of outline the trips for day trips versus multi-day trips and type of use. So if someone's interested in whitewater, there is a particular section of interest that describes that. And then if someone's interested in more of a tubing run or a fishing run, we do denote and call those out descriptively. I think they are denoted on the map itself, but more so just in terms of descriptive nature on a side panel. Shuttling logistics, I don't know. I think, I can't remember, I don't have it in front of me. I think we definitely, that kind of comes out to scale as well. I think the scale for those maps is definitely wide enough to where you can see the relevant roads and routes, with the shuttle itself. I don't know if we call out specific shuttle routes for those. That's a great point. And I think, if space and scale allows for that, denoting those is really helpful, especially if it can be a complex route to where you might actually be using the map for your shuttle versus, not local knowledge or using your GPS or something like that. Looking through the list here for there's other thoughts.
Don't think I have too much to add to that, Jack, except that, again, if people want to include those things like shuttle routes and different things in their river maps, that's a great thing for us or interactive map to link to spread that knowledge to folks trying to get on the river.
Yeah. So I think I just thought about, just since we're kind of in general conversational mode, and feel free to put out other questions as well, given we have a few more minutes left here. There's a question about indicating river mileage and whether it should proceed downstream or come upstream from an originating source. And I've seen both, and typically my experience has been, people think more of numbers increasing as they go downstream. But with that, you have to find a particular starting point in which to begin that numbering. The one thing we're working on right now here in Transylvania County is not just producing the map itself, but also improving and producing on-river signage and infrastructure. And so, having things like river access points labeled on the map, we found it's really helpful and best practices to have what's labeled on the map match what's on the ground in person. So if the access point is called Island 4 River Access, your map should also say that too, which sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes it's easy to abbreviate something or just to note as to what the bridge is versus another name or something like that. So having stuff be consistent in terms of location and naming has been really important for us in our planning efforts. I think I see a hand up from Cassie. Was that from earlier, or is that another question?
I figured I would weigh in if applicable.
Yeah.
We don't have the, pedal or shuttle information for ours, but we've got 54 miles of paddling on rivers. So we have our Wood River and then our Pawcatuck River, and then two options on our interactive map. One, well, three actually. One is to zoom in directly on the map. Two is to scroll down to a box, select it, and then it shows that particular river segment. And then third is to scroll down even farther, get a description on that river segment, and the map shows just that small river segment as well. I can expand if that person has questions relevant to any of that. I'll put it in the chat too.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
share
yeah,
that
that's
in the chat. That'd be great.
great. Awesome.
I saw another question just a second ago about whitewater sections and information on digital maps. So we link to, one of the things that we do is we link to the American Whitewater website, and so that you're able to figure out that is a whitewater section that they have, and then even on segments that they haven't identified, we have identified as whitewater as well. So it does show up, but we don't create the data per se. We find what data is available and ask river managers to vet that data and to add any local knowledge they have from like the BLM, field offices, or Forest Service. And then that's what so if they say that segment is whitewater, that's what we go with. We go with what they tell us. So we're not actually creating that data. We're just curating that data that we were given.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question too, and especially in a location to where there is prominent whitewater and prominent whitewater running, I think it's a great opportunity to have that map reviewed by local paddlers because I found being a boater, whitewater boater here, people do have different names for different rapids sometimes. Oftentimes the most consistent name is on American Whitewater's website or agency's guide, but it'd be helpful to have. It's really helpful to have that map reviewed by local boaters just to make sure it kind of jives with local understanding and that it's not some old name for a rapid that no one ever calls it that anymore or the difficulty was wrong or something like that. But starting with those resources is great, and then definitely having it reviewed for accuracy and consistency is really helpful too.
I would say to David from Louisiana, what's whitewater? I think for you guys, that might be storm surge.
Yeah, cool. I'm still looking through the chat here. I think we touched on most things, but if we didn't, feel free to follow up. Happy to answer questions. My email is just jack@riverlink.org. I'll put it in the chat, and I think James can definitely do the same. But yeah, thanks for everyone's interest and engagement. Definitely always happy to chat about rivers and maps and GIS and stuff like that. I guess,
I'll add
Jack, if we
mine.
go back to those last few slides.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. And then if James, you had one more thing to add, but yeah, if you
Oh, I
want to pull.
put my email in the chat if there's anybody that has specific questions about the National Rivers Project or any of the methods I use for digital mapping. I'm happy to chat anytime.
Well, thank you so much, James and Jack, and everybody for joining us and for your thoughtful questions and examples. It's been really awesome and hopefully a good kind of launch pad for people at different places in the process. Our next River Management Roundtable is on February 22nd, same time, and we're going to get into land acknowledgements and their purpose, kind of some best practices and different perspectives on that. And we will have Coulter Pence with the Forest Service and Dr. Sarah Hoagland with the Forest Service and the Pueblo of Laguna presenting on that. So it should be really informative, and we'd love for y'all to join us.
Hi everyone, Angie here, the River Training Center coordinator for RMS. I had to jump in a little late, so I wasn't able to introduce myself at the beginning. But as a reminder, we are recording this session today, and it is available on our video channel, which you can access from this link here or from the RMS website. And you'll find this in addition to over 50 other recordings there, including most of our river management roundtables. And then if you can go to the next slide there, Jack, I just want to point out that we've also got a lot of other upcoming events in addition to the roundtable that Becca mentioned coming up later this month. We've also got a webinar coming up next week on Wednesday around Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. That's part of our Wild and Scenic webinar series where we're doing once a month webinars on Wild and Scenic Rivers. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about those and in particular partnership rivers, please join us next Wednesday. And then we also have another webinar coming up in March on river access planning. That'll be March 15th. So if you're working on a project where you're thinking about either designing or redesigning a launch or a river access point along one of your rivers, I highly encourage you to join us for that as well. And then, yeah, Jack, you can go to the last slide there. This is just some of our contact information again. If you have any follow-up, feel free to reach out.
Cool. Well, thanks, y'all. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And feel free to reach out if you'd like to. And otherwise, that's it for now. Any closing thoughts, Risa, Becca?
Just thanks everyone for joining us today. This is awesome. Thank you guys. Thanks James and Jack and Becca.
Sure thing. Well, cool. With that, close it out. Thanks, y'all, and have a good one. Bye.